I'll ask Beatrice Ferrari to join us here, the moderator of this session, Miloon and myself, just for a short wrap-up, actually, of takeaway points also from the conference here today. So, of course, we've been discussing, for example, also the recommendations for businesses, for states, what to do. But as always, it's important to us also to discuss actually what can we take away from such a conference? What can we take on in the year working from now on? And also to see what in, say, our context that we are working in is really the areas where we can take things forward. So linking the debate and the recommendation more concretely to action on our level and our reach here in International Geneva. And this is why I'm very happy that you're joining us for this panel. Beatrice Ferrari, you're leading the Directorate of International Affairs at the Canton of Geneva. And I think in that capacity, you do follow many different debates, including discussions on human rights, of course, but also technical discussions on digitalization. And I think there was in the first panel also a question, how do we link to those debates at the ITU or other mechanisms also here in town, but basically two completely different worlds. So first question to you, when you actually follow the different debates, how do you see the link between those issues? And also, is there a particular capacity of International Geneva to bring them together?
Thank you, Felix, and thank you all for being here. It has been a very interesting panel. I learned a lot and took a lot of notes, so I hope I can find myself around all those notes. Now, I think you're right. Seeing a lot of debates here in International Geneva, we see how broad these debates are. Of course, today, and it's obvious, the online and offline worlds are completely intertwined. It's very difficult to make a difference between these two worlds. We discussed right before in the panel about the role of states, in shutting down in a geographical way the access to the internet. But we know also, and it was given as an example, that there is a network. So even with the shutdown, we can still communicate with and still exchange. And what happens, and we see here also in International Geneva, that the organizations that are here, the NGOs that are here, are also vulnerable to, for example, cybersecurity issues, to the potential for others outside to disrupt the processes that are taking place here in Geneva, be it at the global or local level. So we have discussions. Last week there was discussion. There was the GHRP summit. We were talking about, the potential of quantum technologies in the future for society, and at the same time, there are very concrete discussion about access to the internet in context where you don't even have electricity. And we always think that these debates are very far from Geneva, but actually in the context that we are now under crisis with thinking about, energetical dependency, possible shutdowns this winter, we see that we are all weak in this respect. So I think the global thoughts and local thoughts about access to public service, about discrimination and capacities you need to access the internet, not only in the infrastructure, but the competence you need to know how to use it to access, for example, public services. These are all questions that we have also at a very local level. In regards to what International Geneva can bring to these debates, I think the potential one to bring together different stakeholders to talk about these issues. We talk about the role of also of the companies, of course. We have already some projects, the GIGA project, for example, bringing ITU together with UNICEF in trying to give access to schools to the internet. So that's something that is being discussed here. I think the capacity here in Geneva to have also civil society to address the issues is something that is very crucial. These are issues that cannot be dealt by one organization only. We need to have everyone around the table. And also I think that the neutral space or open space for dialogue, this is also something that is very important because internet is power. It was really well illustrated this afternoon in the session. So you need spaces where you can discuss that somehow, even within the geopolitical state that we have today in the world. And we try to have Geneva as being this open place for discussion.
Thank you very much for that. And actually also, if I can just maybe expand, so that was the Geneva part, but also having listened to the panels of the conference discussing positive and negative aspects of being online or of being deprived of access, of course, to the digital world. Would you have some main takeaways, points from that debate, just on the substantive side?
Well, something that happened, I mean, that I've noticed is that the actual regulation and discussion about what happens about access is very slow compared to the technological development. So we lack a little bit of anticipation somehow in addressing those issues, and that's probably something that we should improve. And also the potential of including human rights mindset not only in the access, but also in the design of technologies, and working also around access, about balance, equity, about open source, who provides also that kind of infrastructure. That is something also that we should discuss probably even further.
Thank you. And before coming back to you also with a question more particularly on local governments actually use of those tracking tools and those discussions we had. May I turn first to you, Miloon? Actually, also, you've been a special rapporteur, you're a member of a commission of inquiry, you've been very much involved with a national mind, or say also a hands-on mindset, but with the international system. So also from the discussions in the two panels, what would you see as specific, again, takeaway points and also action points for human rights system, for the treaty bodies, for the special procedures, for the Office of the High Commissioner, which are, of course, also our main target audience, if I may say, of the Geneva Human Rights Platform, working really towards enhancing the functioning of those bodies. So from the various points of discussion, where we have discussed role of states, of businesses, but also, of course, every now and then again, of the community and the specific mechanisms, what would be some highlights that you'd project forward and give another suggestions maybe for a research project like Yuval did already earlier today?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. I think that one sort of recommendation we could make is, since it's such a cross-cutting issue, and as we've heard, it impacts on a range of human rights, internet shutdowns and general disruptions. I think it calls for not a sort of piecemeal approach, but perhaps a collective statement or a collective action from UN special rapporteurs. This could come from, maybe a resolution of the Human Rights Council, but I know rapporteurs are not necessarily open to being directed, so it could come from the coordinating committee of the rapporteurs. A number of rapporteurs have covered the issue in their reports or in their country missions, but if there was a sort of a joint initiative, as is happening now with the issue of climate change, for example, that would be very useful. Also, I think some more legal and policy direction from treaty bodies, whether it's in the form of general comments or general recommendations, particularly tied to the treaty obligations that states have. If there was more clarity on some of the points we were discussing on criteria, on what is the ambit of action that is there for states at the national level, I think that would be very useful. But I would like to see more coordinated collective action from the independent parts of the UN human rights system, and I also see a role for obviously groups that are doing fact finding and all to expose more. I think that the information is still very patchy in terms of what the impacts are, because we don't have access to every country and every region. So if there could be more direction to say, okay, every time a special rapporteur goes to a country, she or he should cover the issue of access to the to the digital space. And just some thoughts.
Thank you very much for those also recommendations looking at the international actors. Now, let me also maybe close the circle and come back also to the specific outcomes of this morning's discussion on digital tracking tools. So we discussed basically how implement recommendations to states and also the implementation thereof can be tracked and how digital technologies can help us in that. And I think we're often looked at basically the state as a receiver of or user of that information, and civil society, of course, also as holding states accountable. But specifically turning back to you, Beatrice, also, I was wondering, what do you think those digital tracking tools, could they also help local governments actually to better link planning and policy to international human rights recommendations received by the states? Would you see would you be an additional client or an additional benefit basically there for local governments to be more active also in link with international recommendations?
Yeah, I think if you look at local government, they are at the forefront in implementing many recommendations and dealing also with concrete tasks and crises, etc. So in general, local government have a very important role, and also the interface to citizens, the first interface that citizens have on various issues. So in this specific context, we could imagine that easy access to an online platform or database resuming, for example, the country's human rights obligation, the recommendation, etc., received from the UN human rights mechanism could be useful for those local governments to implement them. At the same time, local governments, and that was also discussed before, they're also at the forefront of trust. How do you trust your government in dealing with data? How do you provide them with data? How you build this trust between the citizens and the local government? So I think it's an interesting point to involve more the local governments. We have here in Geneva a structure called the Geneva Cities Hub that has this role in making the interface also between discussions that are taking place within the international organization and the local government.
Well, thank you very much for that. So I think we see the value for the international community, but also for the very local government level. And well, we also see that there's a lot of issues still to continue the discussion, but also definitely to look more specifically into the implementation, the innovation capacity also of the international bodies when we talk about the e-rights, and also to see how to really take those issues forward. So with this, I would like to actually invite you all to keep working with us when we also, through the coming year, will look more closely at the data revolution that we see in the human rights world, at all those debates in which we definitely want to keep engaging also from the side of the Geneva Human Rights Platform. And in closing this conference today, I, of course, want to thank very much all of you, all the speakers, moderators, panelists of this conference, all the participants here in the room, and of course, again, online, including for your participation and the question posed to the panels. And of course, want to thank my team, Domenico and Stefania in particular here in the room, for helping to bring about this conference. As always, it's a challenge. You go into such a conference, you see like, okay, what will be a topic that's really of interest, but also not only of interest, but what's our specific contribution? And I think just as we saw in the closing, there is specific points that can bring to a topic as much discussed as digitalization when we look at the specific impacts of the mechanisms and how to further that discussion. So I hope you'll first of all now stay with us for the cocktail that's just served in front of the room, but also stay with us then in another way, not as literal, but for the continuation of those discussions throughout the year. And I'd like to thank you again all for your active participation, for your interest in the conference. And with this, I'm closing this conference, and thank you very much.